What's up my loves, my name is Paige, this is Pages with Paige, and today we're going to be doing my October wrap up. The thumbnail was a little bit deceptive, and the main reason that was because I read a lot of library books and a few e-arcs. So technically I read 14 things, but I only have 5 things to show you left, and one of these is also a library book as well. We love my library. I am really proud of the tome that I got through in October. It did put me in a reading slump, but I still managed to read 14 things outside of that. So I will also be going through and telling the books that fit for the magical hop-along and their prompts, as I really failed with my check-ins throughout the month. So yeah, sorry. So let's dive into the stats. First things first, like I said, I read 14 books and that equated to 4,445 pages, which averages out to be 143 pages per day and about 317 per book. Considering I had a book that was over 1,000 pages and my average page per book still managed to be lower than last month, I am impressed at the amount of small things I had to read to make this happen. And my average rating was a 4.11. So again, on the lower end. In terms of genre, I read 1 anthology, 1 contemporary, 4 fantasy, 3 horror, 1 non-fiction, and 4 things of poetry. In terms of format, I read 3 ebooks, 4 physical books, 6 physical and audio combo, and 1 ebook and audiobook combination. For age ranges, I read 4 adult, 5 new adult, and 5 YA. I think I really found my groove for where I want to be putting new adult books, and it sort of just fit better. In terms of ratings, I gave 4 5 stars, 1 4.5, 4 4 stars, 4 3.5s, and 1 3 star. 9 of these books were standalones and 5 of these were parts of series. 2 were the start of a new series, which one of them has been published, but the first was the first book in the series and that was an art copy, so there is nothing else, so I'm caught up with that so far, and the rest were continuations on. So that's what we want to be seeing. In terms of biggest, I read It, which was 1,166 pages, and my smallest was Poison Apples, which I believe was 102. And my listening hours equated to 34.3 hours, and majority of that was it. On to the books themselves. We're gonna have a lot of pictures. The first thing that I read was me going, I need to get through my arcs before I start It, and so I decided to read Once More Upon a Time by Roshani Chokshi. I gave this a 3.5. I really enjoyed it. It was a fun take on fairy tales and twisting it to work in a really unique way, and I hadn't seen fairy tales done too much like this before, so it felt really fresh, but it was really short. I don't feel like it offered more, and it was just we're going on a fairy tale adventure, which is fun and enjoyable, but there wasn't much more to it. Although there were particular commentaries on patriarchal societies and things like that, which I found really interesting as well. Once More Upon a Time went for the park entrance to the magical kingdom. So that was to read a fantasy or magical realism, and this did have fantasy elements to it. Then I decided to read Flower Crown and Fearsome Things by Amanda Lovelace, and this was a collection of poetry. I've read The Princess Saves Herself, The Witch Doesn't Burn, and a few other Amanda Lovelace collections, and I enjoy them. This one I gave 3 stars. It just didn't hit in the same way as Once More Upon a Time, and I felt that it was really interesting and there was a lot of mythology references in it, but it didn't do anything that absolutely blew me out of the water. Flower Crowns and Fearsome Things was the Magic Kingdom snack and show, and so I did Corn Dogs and Festival of Fantasy. That was to read a short book and a book after 3 p.m. So very easy to accomplish this. The next book I read was Homeland Calling. So this is edited by Ellen Van Neerven, and it is words from a new generation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices. I didn't realize this going in, but on the back it says check out many of the original songs and music videos on Spotify or YouTube. So I immediately went to look these up, and I was just going to like read along as I listened to the songs, thinking that they weren't directly correlated and more just influenced. No, this is a collection of song lyrics by these groups of teens and children, Aboriginal children around Australia, and they have created these music videos, and this is just the taking of the lyrics from those and putting them in here. Honestly, I'm gonna leave a link to the YouTube playlist below because listening to them was so amazing. It was such a wonderful experience, and this is really short, but there was so much packed into it, and just being able to appreciate the songs as this wonderful entity was what I really enjoyed about this, and I gave it 5 stars. Reading this as song lyrics will not have the same impact. It's still a great collection of lyrics, but you don't get to hear it, you don't get the momentum, you don't get to hear when they repeat the chorus or the bridges. It just doesn't have that same resonance, and I noticed that reading along, because I would be like, oh, okay, we're going back to here, but that's over there, but then we're coming back to here. So it wasn't a direct flow along, and the songs just presented in the way that it was meant to be presented. But I would also recommend getting this book, because all royalties go towards Desert Pea Media's training and development programs for Indigenous communities. So buying the actual book helps so much, and then listening to the songs also helps and provides that extra sense of engagement to make it such a fulfilling event. And honestly, I would love to see more things like this happen, where they are just taking songs and lyrics and having full playlists online. This was going for the Magical Kingdom attraction, It's a Small World. Read a different diversity rep from my own. So I am Australian, but I am not Aboriginal Australian, and I feel like it's so important to be talking about the Aboriginal community that is so amazing and wonderful, and as a white Australian, severely lacking in my education, and I want more. Next up, I read Poisoned Apples by Christine Hepperman, and I really enjoyed this. I gave it a 4 stars, and it deals with a lot of feminist issues, as well as combining fairy tale inspired poetry with the images in it just reminded me of 2010 MySpace era, and I was living for it. So yes, it was a interesting, very short poetry collection, but I feel like the commentary that it made was super interesting. Severe amount of trigger warnings though, so please check those out before going in. There was a lot of references to eating disorder, suicide ideation, self-harm, things like that. So it is a very dark book, but I think that's why it worked so well for me as well. The next was The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur. I gave this a 3.5. I enjoyed the collection, but it didn't hit as much for me as Milk and Honey. Basically, her topics and themes, also again, potential trigger warnings, go check them out, were presented in a way that was really interesting, looking at the evolution of a plant and flower. At the same time, it just didn't have the same resonance, and that's just different poetry collections, different phases of her life, things like that. And so I enjoyed it, but it wasn't anything more than a 3.5. Then I read Homebody by Rupi Kaur. These past 3 books had been my bedtime books, so I'm trying to get back into that swing of having a collection of just really short, easy things to fly through, even a collection of short stories. Even if it's long itself, the stories themselves are quite short, so I'm not constantly getting reinvested into things and can just go to sleep, because that is a problem that I have. So having these, I could just fly through a section and then pop it to the side and pick it up and not feel like I had to finish because I had already concluded off a section nicely. That's why I sort of started flying through these, because I was just reading them at night, and that was really the only thing I was picking up outside of trying to read the next book that I'll talk about. But Homebody, holy sweet merciful Jesus, I gave this 4.5 stars, and honestly it's still sitting with me, so it is a potential to be a 5-star read. I just need to sit on it more. This was the Rupi Kaur that I love. I know a lot of people don't like Instagram poetry. They feel that it's very short, it's not necessary, it's wasting paper, having like 3 lines of text and an illustration, and I fully understand that. I have similar sort of vibes with Gabby Hanna's poetry, which I really can't fucking stand. So I feel like that's a waste of paper, but it's more the content than the actual Instagram poetry. I rather enjoy Instagram poetry. I feel like it shows a true sense of getting to the point and writing it in a way that is so elegant and just captures that little image just so perfectly. And so for me, I really like Instagram poetry. It doesn't bother me at all. But Homebody just hit so hard. It dealt with a lot of issues that I resonated with, and I just appreciated her take on these different issues. So I definitely recommend maybe not starting there, because I think this is where her top work is so far. If you gave Milk and Honey a go and didn't really enjoy it because, or The Sun and Her Flowers, you gave it a go and didn't really enjoy it, I would definitely still recommend checking out Homebody if you do want to continue on, because I think that it is one of the most impactful ones that she has written. This was for Epcot and the attraction of Living with the Land. That was to read a short book under 200 pages, and this definitely fulfilled that. It was 192. Then, the book that fucked me the fuck up for the rest of my reading for the month is It by Stephen King. And I gave this bastard a goddamn 4 stars. 3.54 stars. God damn it. So I started this on the 3rd of October and I finished it on the 17th. And for me, that is a fucking accomplishment. I did not think I was going to be remotely close to getting through this in a somewhat timely manner, and I didn't think I was going to enjoy it. I think enjoy is not necessarily the right word, but at the same time it does encapsulate my feelings pretty well. I find it really hard to talk about this because my issue was not with the particular scene that everyone mentions, which is at the end of the book. If people say it's halfway, they have not read it. It is literally in the last, like, 200 pages. It is not remotely halfway. But it was the slurs. It was the animal abuse, which was fucking intense and made me bawl my fucking eyes out. It was the way that King adds in things that were so unnecessary for the plot, but at the same time it gave some form of character to the book. So this was one of the hardest books to read. I think listening to the audiobook, it was like confliction in the fact that they were saying all these slurs, and I was listening to this going, holy crap, I swear like a trooper. We know this, but I could not imagine saying these words because it's just not what you do. I know you can argue it was for the time, but at the same time, if someone has had to read this and say these words repeatedly to excess, and it's like, okay. So I think that's where my main critique is. I think there was definitely at least, at a minimum, 300 pages too long. But at the same time, I appreciate the coke-induced fever dream that it was. The things that I adored and the reason why it is a 3.5 for someone who is chicken shit is the fact that I loved the exploration of dealing with fear, of dealing with trauma, with dealing with grief, with dealing with the consequences of small town shitty mentalities, with just all these different aspects to it. It really made it an interesting look at it, and that's where my critiques are. It didn't need to have so many slurs. It did not need to go the way that it did with animal abuse. The main scene that everyone gets their gripes over, completely unnecessary. It impacted on me, but not as much as other scenes. Also because I knew about it going in. I didn't know about the animal abuse that is absolutely, I can't even think about it without tearing up. So it's like I knew to prepare myself for that, but I wasn't prepared for anything else. Pennywise creeps me the fuck out. I was fine reading it. There were a few, like 1 or 2 nights when reading it that I was like, I'm uncomfortable. I can see things that I don't want to be seeing. But it was more 2 to 3 days after I finished it that I really spiraled and was like, holy fuck, I can't go outside at night. This is no. But aside from that, I was okay. One of my biggest tips, if you're chicken shit but you want to read this, listen to the audiobook on 3 times speed because it glosses over the scary parts. They don't feel as scary when you've got them talking in the sound of a squirrel. It takes half of that fear factor and just halves it. The only thing it does do is when there's fucking creepy children, like a feminine girly giggle in 3 times speed, is utterly petrifying. Yeah, if you do want to read it, I would recommend listening to the audiobook if you can handle an excessive amount of slurs being actually spoken at you, but also to reduce the amount of fear that you will probably feel towards it. This was the Epcot snack and show for World Showcase and Guardians of the Galaxy. And the World Showcase was anything relating to particular countries. This is American, the author's American. And then Guardians of the Galaxy was relating to the 80s. So 80s vibes, published in the 80s, set in the 80s. And this was published in the 80s, and also half of the story takes place in the 80s as well. Next I read another arc, and that was Comfort Me with Apples by Catherine M. Vellante. This was my first Catherine M. Vellante, and I definitely want to pick up more. I think she is a very versatile, very lot of different things on the go, lots of different genres, lots of different things. But I give this a 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It is super short. It's 112 pages, but half of those aren't necessarily actual text on the page. The margins are huge, but I still feel like I had such a conclusive story in it. This is technically a horror thriller, and I really enjoyed the premise of it. I really don't want to say too much about it, except if you are interested in, because I can't say if you're interested in X, because that will give away a large proponent of it. If it sounds interesting to you, it is heavily based around apples, and I really adored this. The characters were so fascinating. This was for the Hollywood studio Ronto Rap, which is outside your typical genre, so I really don't read horror or thrillers, and this was considered both. Next up was Hector Age E Brown by Talia Hibbert, and holy fuck, are we surprised? I gave this 5 fucking stars, and I finished a trilogy in the year that I started it. What the fuck? Obviously, I gave this 5 stars. I adore these characters. Eve was fantastic. I adored Jacob and just his way of approaching the world. I really appreciated the rep. Can't speak on what it was for own voices, but I appreciated the way that it was presented in different ways. And I really loved how they just work so beautifully in their little dynamic. And I love the fact that Eve stood her ground and was like, I want to listen to music because this helps me focus. And she knew strategies and methods to make her life easier, to do her job better. And listening to music has always been a massive thing of mine. I just get in the zone and I can just go. So to see that portrayed in a book, I really haven't had that sort of presented before. So it was one of those little things that not everyone's going to relate to, but it was just so nice to be able to have someone show that as their experience. And I'm not ready for this to leave my life. I loved everything about it, and go pick up the series because it's a blast. I do know that not everyone is going to love it, but I really hope that you do. Eve Brown is a certified hot mess. I feel that in my soul. This is going towards the Hollywood studio attraction of Mickey and Minnie read a new release. Next up was Crest by Marissa Meyer, and I'm giving this 5 stars. I love this series. I love Crest with my entire heart and soul. She is just so beautiful, so completely naive, but so amazing. Her hacking skills are amazing. This is the 3rd in the Lunar Chronicles, and we are gathering our final bits and pieces for the showdown in winter, and I am super keen. I don't want to say too much more because it is the 3rd book in a series, but I've been having a blast reading these along and getting to discuss all the different aspects to it with the Discord group as part of the Lunaralong, and I'm having so much fun. I really found that the stakes got raised. I know that the stakes are never going to be super high, but there was enough stake for me to be actually sweating. And I think you don't necessarily have to be worried about your characters dying. You can present the stakes in different ways, and Marissa Meyer definitely does that. Crest was for the Hollywood studio show of Beauty and the Beast to read a retelling. In saying that, the next book I read was Fairest, which is the 3.5 novella 222 page thing that comes between Crest and Winter and provides backstory to our villain Lavana. And for Fairest, I gave it 4 stars. So many parts of it were so cringy. I was in pain reading this, but I still really enjoyed it because I finally get to understand our villain. I get to understand her motives, and I get to see her backstory as to how she became who she is, but also she needs psychological help severely. This poor child has been through so much, but also just that's why I gave it 4 stars, because I have a lot of emotions, but also I was so uncomfortable reading this just with how Lavana's character is. If you're reading the Lunar Chronicles, I would definitely recommend actually picking this up. I know some people are deciding to skip over it, which is fine. I don't think it will necessarily impact on the end story, or we will find out hints in Winter. Not sure, haven't read Winter yet, but I feel like for me personally, I'm so glad that I picked it up because I love knowing the backstories to our villains, and this was just it just explained it so much. The next book I read was my October-November pick for my book club, The Library of the Unread, and that's on Facebook, and we are reading All Boys Aren't Blue by Georgia M. Johnson. Oh lordy, this was beautiful, and I am so happy that this exists for gay black teens to be able to find. I feel like George so perfectly encompassed so many different aspects of his life and his personality, and the fact that there are conversations and ways of addressing things that work for some but not work for others, that each individual experience is so varied that, you know, his story is going to be impactful for a lot of people, but there will be people. He grew up in a very loving household. They knew that he was gay from a young age, and so there was never really any issue with it, but it is not necessarily the same experience for everyone being gay, so having his loving, caring family support and dynamic is not necessarily going to be reflective of everyone. But I love the way that he would talk about his experiences and be like, I was very lucky, I was fortunate to have this, and hopefully this book can make these conversations more open and more accessible for families that aren't necessarily so understanding. So I appreciated so many different elements of it. I think it was a fantastic read, and I can't wait to discuss it in further detail with my book club. Also, listening to the audiobook while reading along, absolutely brilliant. He does wonderful narration, and he is just full of sass, and you really get to hear his life through his words. There's a lot of different content warnings in terms of processing sexual trauma, physical abuse, homophobia, a whole slew of things. So again, check your trigger warnings, but also it was so powerful, so impactful that I can see why it is a booktube darling, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone and everyone just to gain a little bit more of a perspective on voices that aren't always heard. And this is going for the Animal Kingdom Snack and Show, Night Blossom and Rivers of Light, which is to read a book that is Instagram worthy and has a beautiful cover. So definitely fulfills those. Then my final arc, this actually got released early, and then I was thinking it was coming out on the 2nd November, so I was like, sweet, I'll leave it till the very end, and then it came out on like the 26th, but that meant that the audiobook was available on Script, so I got to listen along, which was great. So that was The Grimrose Girls by Laura Pohl. I really loved the mixture of fairy tale elements to it. There was just so many aspects of these different fairy tales, but a mystery at the same time. A lot of different dynamics. Very fascinating. It is the first in a series, which I'm thankful that I found out before going in, because I originally thought it was a standalone, and I would have been pissed if I had have read this and gone, what the fuck? What the fuck? Its story arc is concluded, but there is still an overarching plot that will come to fruition throughout the rest of the series, however long that may be. I think it could probably be a duology. I'm not sure how many it's slated for, and it might shift and go in completely different directions, which will be cool. But yeah, I really don't know how it's going to go because there are a lot of different elements. I ended up giving this a 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. There was just something that wasn't clicking for a lot of it. That could have been me under time though. There are 4 main characters. 2 of them are on-page lesbian. One is biromantic demisexual, which is not on page. It's just stated that she has no preference, but she literally says no one in this group is heterosexual. And there is also an asexual, a romantic individual on page as well. There was just a lot. There was some comments dealing with that had me raising my eyebrow sometime. Like, a part of the ace rep was used as a plot device and not knowing how to love, and I don't know, it wasn't done perfectly. I appreciate the representation. I can't comment on any of those, actually. I'm none of those things, but I feel like it's important to be there. I just hope that when I look at Own Voices reviews, that it is going to be not a toxic or harmful experience for them, because I think there were just particular ways of phrasing things that just felt a bit off. But it wasn't consistent, and I don't think the author was intentionally trying to make it seem like a bad thing. It's just the way that it played out and the way that it read a little bit. I was like, oh, wait, hold on a sec. Again, trigger warnings, check your shit. And then the final book that I read, which is going to save my fucking ass with the magical hop-along, is Tokyo Ghoul. This is going towards the Animal Kingdom attraction of animation class to read a graphic novel or manga. This is a manga, and I gave it a 3.5. Objectively, it is a 4 stars. However, there was a scene that really just hit my phobia of vomit right in its core, and I was not in a good mental space to be processing that sort of event. I had had quite a triggering night a few nights before, so I was just like already on high alert, and then reading that I was like, I'm beyond uncomfortable. I've talked about it with Ash, and the chances of me continuing on with this series are pretty slim. I was okay because a lot of this premise is there are human character who is attacked by a ghoul. The ghoul then dies and her organs are transplanted into this boy. So he is half ghoul, half human. The idea and the way that ghouls survive are by eating human flesh. So that dynamic of I need to eat human meat to survive, because literally human food tastes like garbage and tastes like vomit, used explicitly, with I am a human being, I cannot eat morally human flesh. That whole dynamic is a very, very big thing. And it wasn't them going, oh, this tastes like bath, oh, I feel, they get nauseated and throw up if they eat human food. That wasn't an issue. It was just one particular scene where it went a step too far for me. I just, nah. Bowing out. And talking to Ash, he said that that happens, not that particular event, but the nausea, eating human food, that sort of aspect of it does get played up quite a bit, and it gets gory and graphic, and I'm just like, I don't know if I'm in a place where I can deal with this. So maybe when I've worked through therapy a lot more, I might be able to tackle the rest of the series, but for the moment I'm just gonna put it on hold. I liked the narrative, I like the premise of it, I just don't know if I can follow through with the execution, being the person that I am. Again, wasn't a bad manga, just very not what I was expecting on that front, very much caught me by surprise, and it's just one thing I can't do at the moment. So these are just 5 out of the 14 things that I have read this month. I am super duper proud of getting through the chunky monkey that is it, and actually having a decent time with it, and stepping outside my comfort zone and reading quite a few arcs and quite a bit of horror. Let me know in the comments, what was your favorite read of October? Did you go down the spooky route, or did you say nice and fluffy? A little bit of both. I think I went a little bit of both, and I'm not mad about that. Let me know how you did in your readathons. I was planning on doing a whole slew of them, and then just decided to channel it down to the magical Hopathon because I was just overwhelmed. So very overwhelmed. It really fucked me up. I was in a massive slump after that. But anyway, we're out of that now and starting November off with a bang. If you like this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more of this mess, feel free to subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you in my next video.